On the front page of the Matrimonial News, spring of 1882, a woman described herself to a man she had never met. She gave her height, her complexion, her temperament, and her willingness to travel. The paper charged her nothing. The man who answered paid a small fee to correspond. 2 months of letters later, if the exchange seemed promising, she was on a train heading west to marry a stranger. She had never seen his face. In the American West of the 1880s, men outnumbered women by margins that rarely dropped below 5-1 on active cattle ranges, mining camps, and new frontier towns. A man who had spent 3 years working a claim or 2 seasons driving cattle north from Texas could find himself in his 40s with money in his pocket and no realistic prospect of companionship. The frontier had built him. It had left him alone. The Matrimonial News had an answer. Established in England in 1870, it printed weekly in London, San Francisco, and Kansas City. Women placed advertisements describing themselves. Men responded. Letters crossed the country for months at a stretch. Photographs were sometimes exchanged, though not required. A woman might correspond for a year before agreeing to board a train. Some of these marriages lasted. Historians examining records at the National Archives found that mail-order matches produced a higher rate of lasting unions than conventional frontier courtships, largely because both parties had committed their intentions to writing before they ever met. The paper created a kind of accountability that a dance hall introduction could not. But a lasting marriage and a good marriage were not the same thing. And if you were a woman in 1882 with no land, no income, and no family within 500 miles, the advertisement was one of the only doors that was open to you. The advertisement itself was the first problem. The Matrimonial News required no verification for any claim in any listing. A man could describe himself as 35 years old, financially stable, and in good health. He could say he owned land when he rented. He could say he was a widower when he was estranged. He could describe the view from his property and the number of acres under cultivation, and the paper would print every word without question. A woman reading his listing in a parlor in Philadelphia or Cincinnati had no mechanism to check a single claim. She wrote back based on what he told her. He wrote back telling her more. By 1882, the Matrimonial News was running its advertisements simultaneously in London, San Francisco, and Kansas City, reaching men and women on 2 continents. Newspapers in Salt Lake City warned their readers that the publication was, in their words, one of the latest and worst enemies of maiden simplicity. The warnings appeared in multiple consecutive editions. They changed nothing. Every story you have ever heard about a mail-order bride who flourished came from the letters and diaries that survived. The women who found themselves in arrangements that offered no romantic narrative left almost nothing behind. Not because they were silent. Because the law said everything they wrote belonged to their husbands. Women continued to board trains. And the advertisement that had worked stayed in the paper the following week. The Matrimonial News required no proof of age, no proof of income, and no proof that the land a man described actually existed. She had no way to verify a single word before she stepped on that train. Would you have gone? Tell me in the comments. You step off the train at Grand Island, Nebraska. The year is somewhere in the mid-1880s. The German Club of Grand Island had determined there were not enough women of German heritage in the territory. So the men pooled their resources, contacted intermediaries back in Germany, and arranged for 40 women to make the crossing. The women had corresponded with organizers, with descriptions of the territory, and with accounts of what life in Nebraska offered. They had not corresponded with the specific men who would be waiting. You step into a local social hall. The room smells of pine and lamp oil. There are men along one side and women along the other. Introductions are made. A name is said next to yours. Couples are paired. Marriages are performed the following morning. The organizers had allowed for one provision. If any woman changed her mind overnight, the arrangement could be annulled before noon. By noon, all 40 marriages were in effect. That night was the only decision these women would make in the next several years that was entirely their own. The morning after, everything they owned, everything they might earn, and every legal agreement they would ever need to sign had passed, by law, to the man they had met the previous evening. The German club had not invented this arrangement. The template had been built before them. Asa Shin Mercer was 21 years old when he was appointed the first president of the Territorial University of Washington in 1861. The title carried weight, but not students. The territory had almost none. In 1864, Mercer traveled east with a different plan. He would recruit women to come west. Not as brides, precisely, as teachers, as workers, as people who could build something in a place that needed them. The pitch was respectable. The need was real. The first group of women arrived in Washington Territory in 1865. The second, closer to 100 women, arrived in 1866. What Mercer had described in his Eastern recruiting tours and what waited for the women at the dock were not the same thing. Men who had contributed money toward the passage considered that contribution a kind of investment. Women who had skills in teaching found positions available, though fewer than Mercer had suggested. Those without a designated trade found the territory's expectations waiting for them on the pier. The men who had financed the crossing had already decided what the arrangement entitled them to. There is no complete record of how many women who arrived on those ships wished to leave on the ship that had brought them. You are inside a structure now, one built before you arrived. Your name is on the manifest. The decision, in most of the ways that mattered, had already been made. Now consider what happens when you want to leave. You are on the frontier in 1882. You are married to a man you met through letters. He is not what those letters described. The steadiness he wrote about is not in the house with you. The land does not quite match what he described. You want a divorce. Under the doctrine of coverture, which remained in full effect in most frontier states throughout the 1880s, a married woman did not exist as a separate legal person. You could not own property. Not the land, not the furniture, not the clothes you were wearing. You could not sign a contract. You could not hire an attorney on your own authority. To begin divorce proceedings, you needed a lawyer. To pay a lawyer, you needed the court to order your husband to provide what the law called suit money, a sum the judge considered reasonable for your legal representation. The only person legally required to fund your escape was the man you were trying to escape from. He decided what was reasonable. Courts accepted whatever he offered. If he offered nothing, and the judge accepted that, the case stalled. You went home. On October 31, 1897, the Los Angeles Herald reported that a 32-year-old man had shot and killed his wife. A 19-year-old woman he had met through an advertisement in a matrimonial paper. The paper noted she had been heavily insured at the time of her death. There was no listed next of kin for her in the territory. Her name was not published. The doctrine that removed a married woman's legal identity stayed on the books in most states until well into the 20th century. It outlived the cattle drives, the frontier towns, and the men who placed those advertisements. If that is the kind of history you want to understand, Subscribe. There is more coming. They made it work anyway, not all of them, and not without cost. But the women who came west through matrimonial advertisements were not passive. Many arrived with skills, with plans, and with a clear-eyed understanding that the frontier required adaptation above all else. They built households in places that barely had buildings. They delivered children in sod houses during blizzards. They kept livestock alive in droughts that killed most of the herd. They organized churches. They started schools. They pushed Wyoming Territory to become the first place in the country to grant women the right to vote in 1869, years before the frontier had quieted enough to be called settled. The advertisement had described a door. It had not described what was on the other side, or how heavy the door was, or whether anyone would help them open it. They went through it anyway. Many of them did not look back. The front page of the Matrimonial News is still there. Spring of 1882. A woman describes her height, her complexion, her willingness to travel. The man who answered has already paid his fee to correspond. The letters are already crossing the country. She does not know yet what waits at the end of the line. She is already on the train.